Hi, welcome to Fiction Fingers Fairy Channel. Please subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories. And don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you, $. Andy decided to send another text, hoping for a response this time. Hey, Alice, just wanted to make sure everything's alright. Let me know if you need anything, he typed, his fingers tapping anxiously on his phone screen, but once again there was no reply. Andy paced his room, his mind racing with all sorts of possibilities. Has something happened to Alice? Was she okay? Seeing no response from Alice, Andy decided to go to her house. With worry etched on his face, he made his way to her doorstep, each step heavy with concern. Andy stood outside Alice's house, his heart pounding with worry as he raised his hand to knock on the door. Each tap against the wood echoed in the quiet neighborhood, but there was no response from within. "Hello, Alice?" Andy called out, his voice tinged with concern as he waited for a reply. But silence greeted him, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Andy's anxiety grew with each passing moment as he wondered why there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, hoping that maybe Alice hadn't heard him the first time. "Alice, it's me, Andy, are you there?" he called out, his voice tinged with urgency. Still, there was no response. Andy's mind raced with all sorts of possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Has something happened to Alice? Was she avoiding him? Andy returned to his own home, his heart heavy with worry. The events of the day had left him deeply unsettled, and as he stepped through the door, a wave of unease washed over him. He paced back and forth in his living room, his mind consumed by thoughts of Alice. Where could she be? Was she safe? The uncertainty gnawed at him, filling him with a sense of helplessness. Andy sank onto the couch, his head in his hands as he tried to make sense of the situation. He couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the unanswered questions that plagued his mind. As the minutes ticked by, Andy found himself unable to relax. Every sound outside made him jump, every passing moment only deepened his worry. He glanced at his phone, hoping for a message or a missed call from Alice, but the screen remained blank. The silence was deafening, amplifying his anxiety with each passing second. Suddenly, Andy's phone rang, breaking the heavy silence in the room. He glanced at the caller ID and saw that it was Sarah, his cousin. With a mix of relief and apprehension, he answered the call. "Hey Sarah, what's up?" Andy greeted, trying to keep his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. "Hey Andy, how was your date with Alice last night?" Sarah's cheerful voice came through the line. Andy hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. It was okay, I guess," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Sarah sensed the hesitation in Andy's voice. "Just okay? What happened?" she asked, concern creeping into her tone. Andy sighed, deciding to be honest with Sarah. "Well, everything seemed fine, but today I haven't been able to reach Alice. She's not responding to my calls or texts," he admitted, his voice tinged with worry. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again. "That's strange. Have you tried going to her house?" she suggested. "Yeah, I did, but there was no answer," Andy replied, frustration evident in his tone. Sarah's concern grew as she listened to Andy's explanation. "I'll come over right away, let's figure this out together," she said firmly. Andy felt a surge of gratitude towards his cousin. "Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it," he said, relieved to have someone by his side during this anxious time. "Hey Andy, why don't we meet up at the coffee house near your place?" Sarah suggested. "Sure, that sounds like a good idea," Andy agreed. As they ended the call, Andy couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that gripped him. He could only hope that together, he and Sarah would be able to find out what had happened to Alice. "So, what's your plan?" Sarah asked when she met Andy at the coffee house. As Andy confided in his female cousin about his feelings for Alice, he sought her guidance on how best to approach the situation. With a sympathetic ear and a wealth of experience in matters of the heart, his cousin listened intently, offering words of encouragement and advice. Meanwhile, Alice, still lost in her confusion about her feelings for Andy, happened to be walking near the coffee house where Sarah and Andy were meeting. As she passed by, she caught sight of them through the window, deep in conversation. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw Sarah sitting so closely beside Andy. The sight pierced her heart with a pang of sadness and jealousy. Feeling a surge of mixed emotions, Alice stopped in her tracks, her mind racing with thoughts. She couldn't understand why seeing Sarah with Andy affected her so deeply. Was it because she had developed feelings for Andy herself, or was it simply a fear of losing the connection they shared? Lost in her thoughts, Alice stood there watching Sarah and Andy interact, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Inside the coffee house, Andy continued discussing their plan with Sarah, unaware of Alice's presence just outside. He was determined to find Alice and make sure she was okay, but little did he know the turmoil she was experiencing just a few feet away. As Sarah made a call, Andy glanced out the window, catching sight of Alice standing there. "Alice," he said. Andy rushed out of the coffee house in an attempt to catch up with Alice. "Alice!" Andy called her, his voice filled with urgency. Alice stopped in her tracks, her back still turned towards him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. When Andy finally caught up to her, she turned to face him, her eyes clouded with sadness and jealousy. "Please don't talk to me," Alice pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, her words laced with a mixture of hurt and frustration. Andy's heart sank at her words, the pain evident in her tone cutting through him like a knife. "Alice, please, don't misunderstand," he began, reaching out to touch her arm gently. But Alice shook her head, her expression pained. "Please don't say anything," she interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. Andy felt a lump form in his throat as he searched for the right words to say. He could see the hurt in Alice's eyes and he hated himself for causing her pain. "I'm sorry, Alice," he said softly, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just want to make things right." Alice looked away, unable to meet Andy's gaze. She knew she was being unfair to him, but her emotions were too overwhelming to ignore. Andy sighed, feeling helpless as he watched Alice retreat into herself. He longed to comfort her, to assure her that everything would be okay, but he knew he had to respect her wishes. With a heavy heart, Andy took a step back, giving Alice the space she needed. He could only hope that someday she would be able to forgive him, and that they could find their way back to each other. "Oh, this is bad!" Sarah exclaimed, her voice filled with concern as she approached Andy from behind, startling him. Andy turned around, surprised to see Sarah standing there. "I'll meet with Alice to explain the truth," Sarah said, her voice firm as she made her decision. Andy looked at Sarah, surprised by her determination. "Are you sure, Sarah? I don't want to drag you into this mess," he said, concern evident in his voice. Sarah shook her head, placing a reassuring hand on Andy's arm. "Don't worry about me, Andy. I want to help," she replied, her eyes reflecting her sincerity. Andy felt a surge of gratitude towards his cousin. "Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it," he said, touched by her willingness to support him. As Alice returned home, tears streamed down her cheeks, her heart heavy with sadness and frustration. She collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in her hands as she let out a sob. "It's true. Handsome and wealthy men only see women as their playthings, and Andy will surely choose that girl. She's far more beautiful and stylish than I am," Alice muttered to herself, her voice choked with emotion. Lost in her despair, Alice couldn't shake off the feeling of inadequacy that gnawed at her. She couldn't help but compare herself to the image of the girl she believed Andy would choose over her. The thought of losing him to someone else filled her with a deep sense of sorrow and self-doubt. Through her tears, Alice couldn't see past her own insecurities, unable to imagine a future where she was worthy of Andy's love and affection. In her mind, she was convinced that she could never measure up to the standards set by society's ideal of beauty and status. As the weight of her thoughts bore down on her, Alice felt a sense of hopelessness wash over her. She couldn't bear the thought of facing Andy and the girl she believed he would choose over her. In her eyes, she was already defeated, resigned to the belief that she would never be enough for someone like Andy. To be continued.